April 1841. Minutes of the General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Minutes of the General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints held at the city of Nauvoo, Hancock County, Illinois, on the 7th day of April, in the year of our Lord, 1841. Conference convened at 10 o'clock a.m., when the names of the presidents of the several quorums were called, who took their seats on the stand, and their counselors immediately in front. The meeting was then called to order, and the choir, under the superintendence of B.S. Wilbur, sung a hymn, and the conference was opened by an address to the Throne of Grace by President W. Law. The clerk was then called upon to read the report of the First Presidency, which was read. On motion, resolved that the report be printed in the Times and Seasons. President Rigdon arose and stated that in consequence of his weakness from his labors of yesterday, he would call upon General J.C. Bennett to officiate in his place. General Bennett then read the revelations from the Book of the Law of the Lord, which had been received since the last General Conference in relation to writing a proclamation to the kings of the earth, building a temple in Nauvoo, the organization of the church, etc. President Joseph Smith rose and made some observations in explanation of the same, and likewise the necessity which existed of building the temple, that the saints might have a suitable place for worshipping the Almighty, and also the building of the Nauvoo boarding house, that suitable accommodations might be afforded for the strangers who might visit this city. The choir sung a hymn, and the meeting adjourned for 1 hour. Conference met pursuant to adjournment, and was called to order by President W. Law. The choir sung a hymn, and President W. Marks addressed the Throne of Grace. General Bennett read the charters granted by the legislature of this state for incorporating the city of Nauvoo, the Agricultural and Manufacturing Association, and for the Nauvoo House Association. On motion, resolved that the charters now read be received by the Church. Carried unanimously. President D.C. Smith arose and gave an exhortation to the Assembly. General J.C. Bennett then spoke at some length on the present situation, prospects, and condition of the Church, and remarked that the hand of God must indeed be visible in accomplishing the great blessings and prosperity of the Church, and called upon the saints to be faithful and obedient in all things, and likewise forcibly and eloquently urged the necessity of being united in all their movements. And before he sat down, he wished to know how many of the saints who were present felt disposed to continue to act in concert and follow the instructions of the First Presidency, and called upon those who did so to arise to their feet, when immediately the saints, almost without exception, arose. The choir sung a hymn, and the meeting, after prayer, adjourned until tomorrow morning. Thursday morning, April 8th. At an early hour this morning, the different quorums who had previously been organized came to the ground and took their seats as follows. The First Presidency, with the presidents of the quorums on the stand, and the High Council on the front of the stand, and the High Priesthood on the front of the right of the stand, the 70s immediately behind the High Priesthood, and the elders in the front to the left, the Lesser Priesthood on the extreme right. On motion, resolved that this session of Congress continue until Sunday evening. President J. Smith declared the rule of voting to be a majority in each quorum, exhorted them to deliberation, faith, and prayer, that they should be strict and impartial in their examinations. He then told them that the presidents of the different quorums would be presented before them for their acceptance or rejection. Bishop Whitney then presented the First Presidency to the Lesser Priesthood, who were unanimously accepted. President J. Hicks presented them to the Elders' Quorum, unanimously accepted. President J. Young presented them to the 70s, unanimously accepted. President D.C. Smith presented them to the High Priesthood. Counselor Elias Higbee presented them to the High Council, unanimously accepted. The clerk then presented them to the presidents of all the quorums on the stand, unanimously accepted. General J.C. Bennett was presented with the First Presidency as Assistant President, until President Rigdon's health should be restored. The presidents and counselors belonging to the several quorums were then presented to each quorum separately for approval or rejection, when the following persons were objected to, viz. John A. Hicks, President of the Elders' Quorum; Alanson Ripley, Bishop; Elder John E. Page, one of the 12, and Noah Packard of the High Priesthood; Newell K. Whitney, Bishop. Moved their cases be laid over until the intermission to be tried before the several quorums. President Joseph Smith presented the building committee of the House of the Lord to the several quorums collectively, who were unanimously received. President Smith observed that it was necessary that someone should be appointed to fill the quorum of the 12 in the room of the late Elder David W. Patton, whereupon President Rigdon nominated Elder Lyman Wight to that office, who was unanimously accepted. Elder Wight stated that it was an office of great honor and responsibility, and he felt inadequate to the task, but inasmuch as it was the wish of the authorities of the church that he should take that office, he would endeavor to magnify it. On motion, resolved that James Allred be appointed to the office of High Counselor in the place of C.C. Rich, who had been chosen a counselor to the presidency of this stake. On motion, resolved that Leonard Sobey be appointed to be one of the High Council in the room of David Dort, deceased. The choir sung a hymn, and after prayer by President Rigdon, the meeting adjourned for 2 hours. Conference met pursuant to adjournment. A hymn was sung by the choir. President Rigdon delivered a discourse to the conference on the subject of baptism for the dead, which was set forth in a manner new and interesting, and with an eloquence peculiar to the speaker, which was listened to with intense interest by the assembly. General Bennett made some very appropriate observations in continuation of the subject. President Smith likewise followed on the same subject, threw considerable light on the doctrine which had been investigated. The choir then sung a hymn, and after prayer by Elder W. Smith, it was moved that conference adjourn until tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Friday morning, conference met pursuant to adjournment. The quorums reported that they had investigated the conduct of the persons who had been objected to, and that they had rejected Allinson Ripley and James Foster. Leave was then given for Elder James Foster to make a few remarks to the quorum respecting the charges preferred against him. After speaking, on motion, resolved that James Foster continue his standing in the church. Resolved that as Allinson Ripley had not appeared to answer the charges preferred against him, that his bishopric be taken from him. President J. Smith made some observations respecting the duty of the several quorums in sending their members into the vineyard, and also stated that labor on the temple would be as acceptable to the Lord as preaching in the world. President Smith then stated that it was necessary that someone should be appointed to collect funds for building the temple. On motion, resolved that John Murdoch, Lyman Wight, William Smith, Henry W. Miller, Amasa Lyman, Leonard Sobey, Jehiel Savage, and Zenas H. Gurley be appointed to travel and collect funds for the same. A hymn was then sung by the choir, and prayer by President D. C. Smith. President J. Smith then stated that he should resign the meeting to the presidency of the stake and the president of the High Priest Quorum. The building committee were called upon to address the assembly. Elder Cahoon first took the stand and spoke at length on the importance of building the temple, and called upon the saints to assist them in their great undertakings. Elder Alpheus Cutler spoke in continuation and made some very appropriate remarks. The conference adjourned for 1 hour. Conference met pursuant to adjournment. Elias Higby spoke on the same subject. Elder Lyman Wight then came forward and addressed the meeting at considerable length. The clerk read a letter from Elder J. Taylor in England to President Joseph Smith, which gave an account of the prosperity of the work of the Lord in that land. On motion, resolved that conference adjourned till tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Friday, April 9th. The weather being so wet and cold, the conference did not meet. Saturday, the weather was unfavorable, consequently, no business was transacted. Sunday morning, the conference again met. Elder Gorley was called upon to preach. He spake on the subject of the literal fulfillment of prophecy. President Rigdon made some observations on baptism for the remission of sins. A hymn was sung by the choir. Conference adjourned for 1 hour. Conference met pursuant to adjournment, and was addressed by the bishops of the stake, who stated the situation of the poor who had to be supported, and called upon the saints to assist in relieving the necessities of widow and fatherless. Elder Lyman Wight made some observations on the subject. President Joseph Smith then addressed the assembly and stated that in consequence of the severity of the weather, the saints had not received as much instruction as he desired, and that some things would have to be laid over until the next conference. As there were many who wished to be baptized, they would now go to the water and give opportunity to any who wished to be baptized of doing so. The procession was then organized and proceeded down to the water. After the baptisms were over, on motion resolved that the conference adjourn until the 1st of October next. R. B. Thompson, Clerk.